Hi, my name is Richard Duffy. I am the SAP Business One product evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session where I'm going to address some of the conceptions and some of the misconceptions about how we deliver multi-tenant deployments with SAP Business One. Since we launched SAP Business One on demand at CeBIT 2012, there's been quite a bit of conversation on the web around this whole concept of multi-tenancy. Now, a lot of multi-tenancy comes down to how you define exactly what multi-tenancy is. I'm not going to necessarily wade too deeply into that definition of multi-tenancy, but I do want to address specifically how we deploy SAP Business One in a hosting center, so that from one deployment of SAP Business One with one instance of Microsoft SQL Server, we can deploy multiple separate companies for multiple separate legal entities off that single deployment. And to me, that's what multi-tenant is all about. Now, some people will say, well, no, you've got to, only have one database file and have all your data sitting in that one database file. Some people will say, no, look, you can only have one database table for all of your business partners, for example, and every tenant has to share that one table, and so on and so forth. Well, my approach here is that really what you want to do is you want to make sure to truly deliver multi-tenant. You are maximizing the usage of the available hardware and spreading the usage of that hardware across all those tenants. And that's what we do, and that's what I'm going to take you through in today's session. So one of the things I am going to do is I'm going to talk about some aspects of SAP Business One which are forward-looking. So just as a matter of course, I do want to point out that this information that I am going to talk about, as with any presentation where we talk about potential future directions, is subject to change. And if you are going to rely on this information to make your decisions, you should just revalidate the information that's here. And of course, in order to do that, you can do that with your SAP partner or with myself. And again, my name's Richard Duffy. You can always find me at richard.duffy@sap.com, or of course you can find me through a variety of different social media mechanisms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever the case may be. So let's get into it, and let's talk first of all about the basics of an SAP Business One implementation. And a typical SAP Business One on-premise installation looks a little bit like this. First and foremost, you have the SAP Business One client, which gets installed on each end user's workstation. And that's the main user interface that the end users have into SAP Business One. And there's nothing spectacular about that. That doesn't really sort of impact too much on how we do multi-tenant, although I will talk a little bit about that from an architectural perspective. Second component that goes in an on-premise installation is a Microsoft SQL Server database. So you would normally have a dedicated server machine running Microsoft SQL Server, and that's where all of the customer's data gets persisted to. The third component are what we call some of our server components. So these are things like the license service. The license service manages the allocation of end user licenses to make sure that the user is licensed for the functionality that they're requesting. We also have the Business One integration framework, which is what we utilize for a number of different components. For example, the SAP Business One mobile solution uses the SAP Business One integration framework to connect through to the back-end SAP Business One solution. Now, each one of these components can also be split out into its own separate server depending on the amount of load, the amount of traffic, the volume that's being processed on the server. One other component which normally goes in an on-premise installation is we usually specify a shared folder somewhere on the network, the B1_share folder, which is where we store some flat files, Microsoft Word templates, integration templates, and so on. So what we have then is the Business One client, we have our SQL Server instance, and we have the Business One server components. Now let's just talk for a second about the Business One database structure. What we have is we have two main databases. So in your SQL Server instance, when you install SAP Business One, we have what we call the SBO Common. And the SBO Common contains our technical information. And we have one SBO Common database per SQL Server instance. So the SBO Common database is tied to the version of SAP Business One that you are running. So if you're running 8.82 patch level 4, that is controlled by the SBO Common. Now, if you're also running any software solution partner complementary solutions and any SAP add-ons, those also get stored in the SBO Common, so that when the client connects to the database, it does a version check, and if there is a version mismatch between the client and the database, then the client will be upgraded to match the current version of the software as set by the SBO Common. The company database is where we store all of the core information for an individual company. So when we start talking about multi-tenant, there are two things to consider. The things to consider are which version of SAP Business One is the tenant going to be running, and also which software solution partner complementary solutions is the tenant going to be running. But of course, you can have as many software solution partner applications, if you like, these complementary solutions, stored with the SBO Common as you like, and the administrator then determines which of those software solution partner, I'm going to call them SSPs from now on, which of those SSP applications will be used with which company database. So in a multi-tenant environment, each tenant has one or more company databases, and then the decision that the hosting provider has to make is in their infrastructure, how do they want to handle the management of the SAP Business One versioning. That is the main area where you have to make some decisions around the deployment model that you offer as a hosting partner. But of course, you can have multiple different models available, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress. So hopefully that's now clear, the way that the infrastructure works. Alright, so let's now talk about a comparison of what happens in an on-premise and an on-demand installation, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. In an on-premise installation, you are usually working with a scenario of one customer, one set of infrastructure. Okay, your Business One client, your database server, your company databases, and your SBO Common. Alright. However, in an on-premise landscape, in a hosted multi-tenant landscape, we're working on a scenario where multiple customers are sharing hardware and software resources. Customers, by definition and by design, cannot see each other's databases, and they cannot access the databases and the B1 shared folders of other customers. And the installation and configuration of all of this is handled by our cloud control console, as well as the underlying architecture of SAP Business One, which when it is installed correctly in the on-demand scenario actually allows you to do that. So let's then look at this on-demand installation. So the user will access SAP Business One via a remote application session of some kind. They could be using Citrix, they could be using remote desktop services. There's a number of different ways of doing of accessing the client. So all the end user sees is they just basically see a application published onto their desktop. Now, of course, you can have a number of different models. You can publish just the app, you can publish a full desktop, you can publish multiple apps, but again, that comes down to what the hosting partner has determined they're going to deploy. All right? Now, in the data center, so let me be very, very clear for a second. In our model, it is a thin client. So all you need to have on your system to access SAP Business One is a web browser. The web browser accesses the user access portal, the necessary client ActiveX controls, or if you're using Citrix, the Citrix receiver is deployed onto your workstation, and that's it. It's very thin, very quick. I can walk up to pretty much any PC anywhere in the world, whether it's running the Mac OS, Linux, Windows, and I can attach to an SAP Business One on-demand installation and have that up and running in 5 minutes or less. Be attached and be logging onto the system and accessing it. So how does that get done? Well, in the data center that the hosting partner has, they provide a user access portal. They are running the desktop presentation server. All right, so that is where the SAP Business One client is installed, and that can be running Citrix Zen app, or it can be running, as I said, remote desktop services. It's really a matter of how the hosting partner wants to configure that. What they then have is they will have their database server, and they will have a Microsoft SQL Server database instance. Now they can have 1, 5, 20, 100 instances depending on how they need to configure the system. But at its most basic, you deliver multi-tenant with one database instance with a single SBO common and company databases that are partitioned and firewalled from each other on that single database server instance. So that is multi-tenanting. Now there's various flavors that can kick in, and we can have a religious discussion about what is multi-tenant, what isn't multi-tenant, and so on. But from talking with the majority of hosting partners that are out there in the world who are delivering these solutions right now, what they're telling us is this is what they mean by multi-tenanting. So what this allows them to do is to take that single Microsoft SQL database server instance, which is what they get licensed for, and where they incur costs around Microsoft licensing, and they want to have as many instances running on that, or as many databases running on that, or as many tenants running on that as they possibly can. So it's a whole bunch of things that are going to impact on that. What is the hardware configuration of that database server? Is it a quad core? Is it an 8 core? Does it have 16 cores? How much RAM is on it? What is the available disk storage, and so on and so forth? But to a certain extent, the hosting partner manages all of that. That entire layer is abstracted out and is handled by the provisioning process. From the customer's perspective, they don't see any of that. They just see, hey, here is my data. I can see my data. Nobody else can. I'm happy. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress. Then we also have our integration server, which is our Business One integration framework, and that's what we use to deliver applications, as I mentioned before, like the Business One mobile application. And then we also have some central components. We have our remote support platform, we have the license server and the mailer, and then we also have our Business One share folders. So those are all the components which sit inside the data center. So let's be clear, on-premise, all of that, those same components exist in the on-premise installation, but they're only accessed by one, if you like, one entity. Now, of course, you could say, oh, well, yeah, but they can have multiple entities if they're a large enterprise and so on. Of course they can. But, you know, in a traditional on-premise installation, that's what they have. Then when we look at the hosted scenario, all right, what's different is all of this infrastructure, everything sitting inside the data center is shared by multiple tenants. So let's now talk about how we do that. What we've done with SAP Business One, and we started this with release 8.82 of SAP Business One, is we've introduced a number of infrastructure layers which are available for the organizations that are delivering the hosting of SAP Business One. And all of these components go under this generic name of the SAP Business One Cloud Control Center. All right. And this is what we provide. It's a web-based tool that enables the hosting partner, the hosting company, to manage all of these different components in a deployment. So there are three, if you like, four fundamental layers in this process. We have our application management layer. We have our infrastructure management layer, which is then broken down into our infrastructure components and, of course, our servers that sit underneath that. Then we also have a layer which provides the cloud operator, the hosting partner, let's call them that for the sake of the exercise, with all the tools that they need to manage all of this. The basic unit that we work with SAP Business One in a hosted model, in a cloud-based model, is what we call a service unit. Now, a service unit is, if you like, a collection of tenants that access infrastructure. And you can have as many different service units that you want. And you can have one service unit, for example, that's on Business One 8.82, one service unit that's on Business One 8.81, one service unit that's on SAP Business One 8.83. You can mix and match all of those different service units together. So the service unit is the basic, if you like, packaging of all of the Business One application code based on a specific version. Hopefully that's clear. So then that service unit connects to the infrastructure, and you split your infrastructure and you point a service unit to a specific database instance. You point a service unit to your application servers. You point a service unit to your shared folders. You point a service unit to the integration component and the mailer, for example. All right? Then you share between multiple service units two components. The software repository, which is where we store all of the applications for installation, and you share the license server so that the cloud partner could have a license server with 1,000 professional users, and then they choose to allocate 5 to this service unit, 5 to that service unit, or inside that service unit they might allocate 10 to the service unit, and then they'll allocate 3 professional users to tenant 1, 2 professional users to tenant 2, and so on. And then sitting underneath all of that, of course, is the various servers that you have. You know, you might have a storage area network, you might have directly attached storage. Again, all of that is transparent to the user, but that is the area that the cloud partner manages. Sitting off to the side is we have our web-based tools that manage all of this, the Cloud Control Center, and I'm going to take you through and show you that in a second. The remote support platform, and again, if you've not heard of the remote support platform before, that's a tool that we at SAP provide to customers and partners to help drive down their total cost of ownership of running the solution. How does it do that? It manages patches, it manages upgrades, it manages break, fix, repairing. It gives SAP and our partners and customers the ability to schedule jobs, to send through fix packs, to send through repair jobs, and have those executed automatically, securely, and with the user's permission on their system. We then have the system landscape directory, and of course, because we're offering single sign-on with SAP Business One, we also have a domain controller which can run one or multiple domains, and each tenant and the users of that tenant become part of the domain, and by using the Active Directory / domain infrastructure at the moment, that's how we control that single sign-on. In the web access portal, which is where the SAP Business One users come in to access their cloud, they provide a username and a password which is validated across against their account on the domain controller, and then that grants them access to the web access portal, directs them to the appropriate service unit, gives them their sign-on, which directs them to the dedicated single service unit that they're accessing, and away they go. So hopefully that is clear as well. But I think that's all nice. Death by PowerPoint's fine, and I've explained all of these things. What I like to do right now is just quickly show you utilizing SAP Business One and utilizing a live SAP Business One on-demand deployment, exactly how all of these components come together. Now, of course, I'm sure you're going to have questions, and I'd love to have the opportunity to have that discussion with you. If there's anything that's not clear, just again reach out to me, richard.duffy@sap.com, or of course I'm on Twitter at Richard A. Duffy. And you can reach out to me there and ask any questions that you have. But anyway, let's dive in, and I'm going to show you all of these components and how it all comes together in a live environment. So what we're looking at here is the SAP Business One customer portal, which is an example of a front end that a hosting partner might want to use to provision out SAP Business One. This is just an example, but it provides a framework which hosting partners can then use and then plug in their own graphics, plug in their own information, and so on. Really, the core component is the way that they embed the link to start SAP Business One, and of course the log-on mechanism. And I'm just going to quickly log out here, so we'll go right from scratch. So I'll log off, and then let's log back in again, and you can see this is where we're going to get our single sign-on. So I'll just put in my username, and then I'll put in my password. I can select to remember my ID if I want to, and then I'll choose to log in, and I'm now done. So now all I need to do if I want to start Business One is I click here on Use My SAP Business One. It's just providing me with a reminder that I am accessing an application remotely, just a standard security message. I'll click on Connect, and then basically we're using, in this particular scenario, we're using remote desktop services, and it is going to serve up my SAP Business One client onto my desktop. I have no SAP Business One components on my desktop, just the standard components that come with Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows Vista, and that's going to allow me to connect in seamlessly. Now I'll know as soon as my connection is active, because there's details, it goes black, and then bang, up comes SAP Business One. So as far as I'm concerned, the SAP Business One application is running now over the web, the same as it would be running is if I was running it on premise. So let's go and let's take a look at a couple of the infrastructure components that I talked about before that are critical to an SAP Business One deployment. So part one of the new things we introduced in SAP Business One is this concept of the cockpit. And the cockpit uses the SAP Business One integration framework to serve up all of this content. It's using SAP Crystal Dashboard Design to serve up some of our dashboards here. And of course, when we're running SAP Business One Analytics powered by SAP HANA, all of these things are exactly the same, just a squillion, well, not a squillion times, many times, many times faster when we're doing our data refresh and our data updates and so on. So this is the Business One integration framework that's delivering this information up. So then if I go across here and I look at my modules and I go into my administration, one of the things that you will see is that in the administration function, we actually have all of our add-ons. Now, the add-ons that are available here, and by the way, I have super user rights onto the system. So all the add-ons that come up here in the add-on manager are specific to every company that is using this particular service unit. All right, so I can have as many different add-ons as I want, and I can just specify that this particular service unit and all the tenants in this service unit have access to these particular add-ons, whereas the tenants in another service unit do not. Now, traditionally, this is something that you would not go in and be doing unless you were a system administrator. All right, so all of my add-ons would appear in here in my add-on manager. Couple of other things that we deliver as well. If I go in here and I look at my system initialization and I look at my company details, you'll see that I have all of my basic information about my company, my accounting data. All of this information is specific to this company. And through our single sign-on, we are also in a situation where you only see the companies that you have access to. So I might be in a situation where I'm multi-tenanted with 10, 15, 20 other organizations on this same service unit in the data center, but I only see my company database, and I can see the current version that I'm on. If I had multiple companies that I had access to, let's say my tenant deployment, I have multiple companies, then again, I will see all the companies I've got access to, and I can quickly change backwards and forwards between those companies. So again, very, very quick, very, very easy. And the advantage of what we've done with SAP Business One and taking our rich client and basically making it available through a cloud deployment in this multi-tenant model is that we've been able to very, very quickly and easily deliver a rich functional solution that we know appeals very much to our target market, which is those small and mid-sized enterprises. So anyway, that's a quick look at the SAP Business One application itself running in the cloud. It's exactly the same, and it runs exactly the same as it would if I was running it on-premise. And even from the user's perspective, it just appears here as another application in their taskbar. Okay, let's now dive in and have a look at the underlying infrastructure that sits behind that. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log out of SAP Business One here from my cloud server. So I'll just choose to exit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log on to SAP Business One using our Cloud Control Center and just take you through and show you a couple of the components and give you a specific demonstration of how we do manage that whole multi-tenanting process from the perspective of a hosting partner. So I'm going to log on. I'm going to log on as one of my Business One administrators. And now I'm logged in and I'm into the Cloud Control Center. So you can see in my Cloud Control Center, I can manage all of my service units. Now, right now, I've actually got one service unit, and in that one service unit, I actually have a number of tenants that I'm managing. So here's my service unit. It shows me how many service units I've got, how many tenants I've currently got, what the status of all of the different components are. So let's go and we'll take a look at our infrastructure management. Now you'll remember I already told you that we had all of these different components. So I can have as many different database instances as I want available to me here. Right now I've only got one because that's all I need. As many license servers as I want. So if I'm now hosting 500, 600 different users in the system and I need multiple database instances, whatever the case may be, I can manage all of that for load balancing and load management and everything like that. So then I've got my application server here. So this is my primary remote desktop server. Now I've got my common database. I've got my integration components. I've got my shared folders, I've got my mailer service, my software repository, and I've got all of my cloud operators registered here. So this is basically where I'm managing all of the infrastructure that I have, that when I set up a tenant, I'm basically going to choose which of these components I need to allocate to that tenant. So let's go into our application management. So here's my service unit. I've specified that it's a productive service unit. I can see what version I'm running, and I can see right now I've actually got one tenant running on this particular service unit. If I look at the details of this service unit, I can see these are the infrastructure components that I'm using. The database instance, the license server, the database backup repository, and the application server. Then if I look at my tenant, here is my tenant. This is my company name, OEC Computer, which is our standard SAP Business One demo database, and this is a demo server that we are using for doing demonstrations. So it's a demo server in productive use, if that makes sense. So I look at my tenant, and then you can see here's my configuration. Which shared folder is this company using? Which company databases do I have access to? So I've got access to a productive and a demo database. It gives me a view of what licenses are available to this particular tenant, and then it shows me how many users that I have allocated to this particular tenant and how they are configured. So by having this Cloud Control Center, it gives us an easy interface to manage the entire cloud deployment. So if I need to go and create a new tenant, it's basically wizard driven. So if I say, look, I want to create a new tenant, it asks me, before I create a new tenant, complete the following steps. Make sure I've got a service unit, at least one. Make sure I've got a Business One shared folder, a license file, and then we'll create the tenant. So the wizard basically walks me through, and it says, okay, which service unit do you want to deploy this tenant on? So let's say, for example, I've got a tenant and they want to operate on a particular version of Business One. I would have multiple service units here with the different versions of Business One that I wanted to have and make available. Or as a hosting partner, I can say, you know what? My service model is predicated on the fact that when I upgrade everyone. But again, what we're doing is we're giving our hosting partners the flexibility to choose which model they want and giving them all the tools they need to manage that process. So I'll select my service unit, then I'll say next. It's going to ask me my company name. So let's say, for example, I'm going to set up Richard Duffy Industries. Put in my contact information and a description, that's fine. Now it's going to give me the ability, if I want to import a specific license file for this particular company. And then I go through the next step. I'm not going to go step by step through all of this and show you everything, but I set up the company database, I add the users and I assign the licenses. I configure my Business One shared folder, and that's it. My tenant, my new tenant, is ready to go. And again, when I'm going through that process, what am I using? I'm using that shared hardware infrastructure. Let's take one further step, and I'm going to take you in and we're going to have a quick look at this from a database perspective, so you can see the database server and the database instance running behind that. So hopefully that will bring it all together and help you understand exactly how we're delivering that multi-tenanting. So I'm just going to quickly dive across here, and I have a full desktop session running in here, and I'll go and connect to my SQL server. This is exactly how I would work if I was an administrator working for the hosting provider. This is exactly, fundamentally, that is what I'm doing now. I am doing the administration work that the hosting provider does. So let's dive in and let's look at our SQL Server. So I'll connect to SQL Server with the SQL Management Studio. We're using SQL Server 2008 R2. I'll connect to my server, and then here we have it. Here's our instance. So let's look at all the databases that we have. And you'll see this is exactly what I was telling you about before around the way the infrastructure works. So we have a single SBO common database. And the SBO common database, if we look at all the tables that we have in here, this is where we store all that system information. This is where we persist all of the SSP applications in. This is where we manage all of that software version management internally inside SAP Business One. And then I've now got all of these individual company databases, and each one of these individual company databases represents an additional tenant. Now, one database is allocated to one tenant. One instance holds multiple tenants. All right, so very important to understand that a single instance of SQL Server servicing multiple tenants. We don't have one database file with all the tenants all running off that one database file. It doesn't make any sense to do that from a security perspective. And when you're looking at it from the perspective of a hosting provider, they don't care whether it's 5 database files or it's one database file, because the data storage is consistent. There's no redundancy of data, because let's face it, every single one of these different instances is a separate company, so there is no need to have shared data. The only one where we have shared data is the SBO common, and there's only one database for that, which is shared across all of these different tenants, but is only accessible to the data center administrator. If you've got any further questions as a result of what I've taken you through, if you'd like to ask some specific questions or go into some specific details about any of the concepts that I've covered or any of the components that I've taken you through, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, as I mentioned, you can reach me via a number of different social media outlets. You can get to me via Twitter, Richard A. Duffy. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, or of course you can drop me an email to richard.duffy@sap.com. And of course, if I get enough interest, I'm more than happy to schedule an open Q&A where we'll jump onto a conference call and give you the opportunity to fire off any questions that you'd like to have answered, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So again, on behalf of everybody here at SAP, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me, and as always, thanks for watching.